Mainstream news outlets are currently presenting a straightforward but alarming storyline about the global energy market. The message being broadcast is that the Strait of Hormuz has been completely shut down, and that this total military blockade is the primary reason gasoline and grocery prices are suddenly surging. However, when you examine the underlying maritime tracking data, a very different reality appears. The strait has not been fully closed. Instead, it has effectively been converted into a highly profitable geopolitical toll system. Certain countries are being allowed to pass through without restrictions, and those nations are leveraging this structural advantage to reshape the global economic balance in their favor. My name is Colin, and you're watching Colin Moss Channel. Following the outbreak of military operations in the Middle East, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, commonly known as the IRGC, immediately threatened to shut down the world's most critical energy choke point. Under normal conditions, the Strait of Hormuz handles approximately 20% of all seaborne oil and liquefied natural gas shipments worldwide. That equals roughly 17 to 20 million barrels of oil moving through the waterway every single day. As the conflict intensified, major energy firms declared force majeure. Shipping insurance costs surged by 500%. Media outlets began describing the strait as effectively unusable. The International Energy Agency quickly labeled the situation the largest supply disruption in the history of the oil market, warning that the consequences could exceed the oil shocks experienced during the 1970s. To the typical retail investor watching evening news coverage, the situation appears to be a complete and uncompromising military blockade. Between March 1st and March 25th, 2026, exactly 142 vessels successfully transited the Strait of Hormuz. For context, during the same time period in the previous year, 2,652 ships made the journey. That represents a dramatic 94.6% reduction in traffic. However, 142 ships is not zero. It's roughly equivalent to the number of vessels that would normally pass through in about a day and a half, but stretched across an entire month. Even Donald Trump acknowledged during a press briefing that Iran had allowed 10 oil tankers to pass as what he described as a goodwill gesture. Additionally, Iran's diplomatic mission to the United Nations issued a formal statement clarifying that vessels not considered hostile would still be allowed to transit the strait, provided they coordinate with Iranian authorities. The official narrative suggests that the strait has become a war zone where nothing can operate safely, but the data indicates something different. The strait is functioning as a tightly controlled checkpoint where specific ships are granted safe passage under strict conditions. To understand what is really happening, you need to look beyond military rhetoric and focus on the financial mechanics. Let's examine how this selective transit system actually works. Ships entering or leaving the Persian Gulf can no longer use the traditional international shipping lanes. Instead, vessels are being redirected into a highly specific Iran-approved corridor located entirely within Iranian territorial waters, just north of Larak Island. Before a ship can even approach this corridor, the shipping company must submit extensive documentation through intermediaries connected to the IRGC. Required documentation includes full cargo manifests, records of ultimate beneficial ownership, destination port information, detailed crew lists. If the paperwork is approved, the vessel receives a cryptographic clearance code and is often required to accept an armed IRGC naval escort through the strait. Evidence shows these rules are strictly enforced. Ships that fail to comply have been turned away, and vessels attempting to pass without authorization face significant threats, including approximately 6,000 deployed sea mines, drone swarms, GPS spoofing systems. This clearance process is not free. According to statements from Iranian lawmakers, supported by maritime intelligence reports, Iran is charging up to $2 million per vessel for transit. In practical terms, Iran has temporarily overridden the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which normally guarantees free transit passage, and replaced it with a sovereign-controlled fee system. The Iranian parliament is currently drafting legislation to permanently formalize this pricing structure into national law. The goal appears to be converting a temporary wartime tactic into a permanent revenue mechanism. Iranian state media has projected that if shipping volumes eventually return to pre-war levels, the toll system could generate as much as $100 billion annually. That amount could fully replace Iran's heavily sanctioned oil export income with a revenue stream that is difficult for sanctions to disrupt. However, the most strategically important detail is not the size of the fee. It is the currency used to pay it. Multiple ships have already been confirmed to have paid the transit charge, and those payments were not made in US dollars. They were settled entirely in Chinese yuan. By requiring payment in yuan, Iran is effectively conditioning access to this vital energy corridor on participation in a non-dollar financial system. The transactions are being processed through cross-border interbank payment system, commonly known as CIPS, which handled approximately $245 trillion in transactions in 2025. This allows shipping companies to bypass the SWIFT system and the traditional Western banking infrastructure. The result is a structural vulnerability for Western sanctions and a direct acceleration of the long-term erosion of the petrodollar system. Importantly, the $2 million transit fee does not apply equally to all countries. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has formally identified a list of nations eligible for preferential transit coordination. That list includes China, Russia, India, Pakistan, Iraq, Bangladesh. Pakistan's foreign minister confirmed that a diplomatic agreement was reached allowing 20 Pakistani-flagged vessels to pass safely through the strait. This preferential treatment has created a two-tier global energy system. Asian refineries were historically designed to process heavy, sulfur-rich crude oil from the Persian Gulf. Because their governments have secured diplomatic access to the Lyric Island corridor, those refineries continue receiving supply. Meanwhile, many Western buyers are effectively shut out of direct Middle Eastern oil markets. As a result, physical Dubai crude prices surged to $169 per barrel at their peak. That created a $55 premium over Western benchmark prices. At the same time, countries aligned with the BRICS bloc are negotiating discounted energy contracts directly with Iran and Russia. So the dynamic now looks like this. Eastern economies pay transit fees in yuan and secure discounted oil. Western economies scramble to find replacement supplies from Latin America and West Africa. The macroeconomic consequences of this system are significant. The dominant narrative frames the situation as a temporary disruption affecting shipping companies. In reality, the $2 million transit fee functions as an indirect tax on consumers and investors across the Western world. Consider diesel fuel prices in the United States. As of late March 2026, the national average diesel price reached $5.37 per gallon. That represents a 52.8% increase in just 8 weeks. Some states, including California, saw prices exceed $7 per gallon. By contrast, diesel prices in Russia and India remained essentially unchanged during the same period. This contrast provides a clear visual example of the two-tier energy system in operation. Because diesel fuel powers global logistics networks, rising prices are already disrupting supply chains. Major delivery companies, including FedEx and UPS, have raised fuel surcharges to between 25% and 28%. Even the United States Postal Service filed for its first competitive product fuel surcharge of 8%, warning that the agency could run out of cash by 2027 without additional revenue. At the same time, 30% of global ammonia-based nitrogen fertilizer supply is currently suspended due to the disruption. Economically, every 10-cent increase in diesel prices adds approximately 0.1% to the consumer price index. With fuel prices rising sharply and fertilizer supply constrained, analysts expect significant increases in food prices to fully materialize by summer 2026. This situation has placed central banks in a difficult position. The Federal Reserve has kept its benchmark interest rate at approximately 3.64%. From here, policymakers face limited options. If rates are raised, economic growth could stall. A recession could be triggered. If rates are lowered, inflation could become entrenched. Consumer expectations could become unstable. Meanwhile, the European Central Bank faces an even more challenging outlook. According to projections from Goldman Sachs, the ECB may be forced to increase interest rates by 25 basis points in both April and June. The core problem is structural. Monetary policy cannot resolve a geopolitical supply disruption. Interest rate adjustments cannot force Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Financial markets appear to recognize this reality. Current indicators include the 10-year U.S. Treasury yield holding around 4.44%, gold prices surging to approximately $4,492 per ounce. Institutional investors are moving capital into hard assets because they expect inflation pressures to remain persistent. The geopolitical situation may soon reach a critical turning point. President Donald Trump issued a firm military ultimatum to Iran. He established a deadline of April 6th, 8 p.m. Iran must fully and unconditionally reopen the Strait of Hormuz. If Iran refuses, the United States has threatened to destroy Iranian civilian power generation infrastructure. Iran has responded by indicating it would retaliate against similar targets across the Gulf region. Financial markets are already preparing for this scenario. Options traders have dramatically increased bets on oil prices. Specifically, derivative positions predicting Brent crude reaching $150 per barrel by the end of April have increased by tenfold. If oil reaches that level, analysts warn the global economy could enter a synchronized recession comparable to the 1973 oil crisis. The International Energy Agency has authorized a release of 400 million barrels from strategic petroleum reserves. However, analysts estimate that supply would cover only about 20 days of lost production. In other words, the global system remains fragile. There is one modest short-term positive development. The fact that 142 ships successfully transited the strait in March confirms that some oil continues to reach Asian markets. This prevents a complete global energy blackout. Diplomatic channels, particularly those involving Pakistan, are keeping a portion of the global logistics system operating. But the long-term implications remain severe. Iran has demonstrated the ability to selectively restrict global trade, exempt allied nations, impose costs on geopolitical rivals. By requiring multi-million-dollar transit payments in Chinese yuan, the policy accelerates global de-dollarization trends. The two-tier energy market also creates a structural competitive disadvantage for Western manufacturers. While Eastern economies operate with discounted energy supplies, Western businesses face $5.37 diesel fuel, 500% insurance premiums, limited monetary policy flexibility. This situation is no longer simply a regional military conflict. It is increasingly being interpreted as a coordinated financial and economic pressure campaign designed to shift industrial power from Western economies toward Eastern ones. And that outcome may not have been anticipated when the conflict began just 1 month ago. So the key question now is this two-tier energy system the beginning of a long-term shift in global economic power? Or is the $2 million transit fee merely a temporary wartime measure that will collapse once the April 6th deadline arrives? Share your perspective in the comments.